The history of humanity is often written in the blood of the innocent, but there are chapters so dark, so profoundly disturbing, that they were intentionally buried beneath layers of political convenience and international silence for decades. We often speak of the atrocities of the Second World War through the lens of the European theater, yet deep in the frozen plains of Manchuria, a horror of a different nature was unfolding under the banner of the Imperial Japanese Army. Known officially as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, Unit 731 was anything but a humanitarian effort. It was a sprawling, high-tech laboratory of death where the boundaries between medical science and absolute sadism were erased. To understand Unit 731 is to gaze into the abyss of what happens when scientific progress is detached from human morality, driven by an obsessive need for biological supremacy. This was not just a military operation, it was a systematic descent into a living nightmare where thousands of men, women, and children were reduced to mere maruta, or logs, to be processed and discarded in the name of total war. The architect of this darkness was Shiro Ishii, a man whose brilliant mind was eclipsed only by his chilling lack of empathy. Ishii did not view medicine as a tool for healing, but as a weapon of mass destruction that could bypass the traditional battlefield. He envisioned a world where plagues could be harvested, where the plague itself was a soldier that never slept and never surrendered. Under his leadership, the facility at Pingfang became a city of secrets, equipped with state-of-the-art laboratories, massive incinerators, and prison cells that held a rotating population of victims, mostly Chinese civilians and Soviet prisoners of war. The atmosphere of the facility was one of clinical detachment. Scientists in white coats conducted experiments that would make the most hardened soldiers recoil in terror. They were not just studying diseases like anthrax, cholera, and the bubonic plague, they were perfecting the art of delivery, designing specialized bombs that would drop plague-infested fleas over unsuspecting cities, turning the very air and water into silent killers. One of the most harrowing aspects of Unit 731 was the practice of vivisection, conducted without anesthesia under the misguided belief that the use of painkillers would contaminate the results of the research. Imagine the psychological toll on the victims, who remained fully conscious as their bodies were systematically disassembled to study the effects of disease on internal organs. The doctors argued that they needed to see the live progression of the infection, ignoring the screams that echoed through the sterile halls of the facility. This was technology at its most perverse, where the tools of the modern surgeon were used to perform ritualistic torture under the guise of data collection. They frozen limbs of prisoners to study the limits of frostbite, then thawed them using boiling water to observe the skin peeling from the bone. They placed victims in high-pressure chambers until their eyes literally burst from their sockets, all to understand the physiological limits of the human frame for future pilots and divers. The depravity extended far beyond the operating table into the realms of biological warfare testing in the field. Entire villages in China were used as unwitting laboratories. Imperial Japanese planes would fly low, releasing wheat and cotton that were actually carriers for millions of infected fleas. Within days, thousands would succumb to the Black Death, a disease that belonged in the Middle Ages but was being weaponized by 20th-century technology. The scientists would then enter these villages, dressed in protective gear, not to offer aid, but to take notes on how quickly the population died and how the pathogens spread through the water supply. This was the dark side of medical innovation, where the mastery of biology was used to engineer a genocide that was as efficient as it was invisible. The scale of the suffering is nearly impossible to quantify, as the Japanese forces destroyed most of the records and the facility itself as the war drew to a close, attempting to incinerate the evidence of their crimes. However, the most controversial part of this story is not just what happened during the war, but what happened after the guns fell silent. As the United States occupied Japan, the intelligence community made a chilling discovery. They realized that Shiro Ishii and his team possessed data on biological warfare and human physiology that no Western nation had, primarily because the West followed ethical codes that forbade such experiments. In a move that still haunts international relations today, the U.S. government granted secret immunity to Ishii and his staff in exchange for their research. No one from Unit 731 was tried at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal for these specific atrocities. Instead, many of these men went on to have successful careers in the Japanese pharmaceutical industry, academia, and even the Ministry of Health. The knowledge gained from the screams of the Maryuta became the foundation for Cold War biological programs, leaving a legacy where justice was traded for scientific data, proving that sometimes, the most dangerous thing about technology is the price we are willing to pay for it. As we look back at the ruins of Pingfong, we must confront the uncomfortable reality that our modern world is built, in part, on secrets that were never meant to be told. The victims of Unit 731 were denied justice in the name of national security and technological advancement. Their stories serve as a permanent warning to a world increasingly obsessed with genetic engineering, AI-driven bioweapons, and the pursuit of scientific breakthroughs at any cost. History teaches us that when we stop seeing the human being behind the data point, we lose our own humanity. The dark side of medical technology is not found in the machines or the viruses themselves, but in the hearts of those who believe that the end justifies the means. We must remember the names that were erased and the lives that were turned into logs, for if we forget the horrors of Unit 731, we risk allowing the same cold, calculating darkness to find its way back into the laboratories of the future.